Happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another exciting episode of Office Hours. For those of you joining us for the first time, I'm Kamara Toffolo. I'm a resume writer, LinkedIn consultant, and job search strategist who helps established professionals dare to do work differently and land great fitting gigs. I'm very, very excited for our guest tonight. Marie Zimenoff is joining us. She's a 3-time CEO, and she's the CEO of Career Thought Leaders, which is a really great group of all the movers and shakers that you see on LinkedIn. And it's really a global think tank. And Marie is an advocate for the careers industry, and she's a champion of proactive career management. And that's really what we're going to talk a lot about today. Marie is also the podcast founder and host of Career Confidante Radio, which is a Voice America podcast. So before I bring Marie in, I would really love to hear from everybody. Where are you tuning in from? Where in the world are you? Please let me know in the chat. Please let me know in the comments on LinkedIn. Office Hours is very proud of our global audience. So would love to hear where you are tuning in from. And if you're catching this live or on the replay, very curious to hear that as well. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring Marie into the stream. Hello, Marie. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Kamara. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited about our chat.
Yes, me too. I'm glad to be here. I've been watching your Office Hours for some time now. So you have excellent guests and you cover such important topics. I'm honored to come and join you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm honored to have you here. And I think we've got some really great topics, the overarching topic of being a woman in our job search, dealing with bias, which is very timely for this week, which is the week of International Women's Day. By the way, happy International Women's Day to you.
Yes.
Thank you. So just going to check in on the chat and see where everybody is tuning in from. So we've got Christina from Korea. Hello, Christina. We've got Michelle from Connecticut, Dario from Houston, Kathy from Chicago, Srini from Bangalore, India. Awesome. This is so great. And people are saying, hello, Marie. So this is wonderful. And Lisa from Los Angeles. Hi, Lisa. Great to see you. Thanks for joining. So tonight we really are going to dig into the topic around being a woman in job searching, how we can best navigate that, deal with bias. So in your experience, what would you say you've noticed the most as being job search or career obstacles that women particularly have to face?
Yeah, when I first started thinking about this, I was like, well, let me count the ways.
Right.
We don't, there's a lot. And when I first think of it, a lot of the things that come up for me relate to motherhood, because of course you and I are both mothers of young children, and there's a lot of stress that comes along with that and trying to manage a career. But women in general face barriers because we usually are a caretaker of some sort. Even women who aren't mothers, maybe taking care of parents or, nieces and nephews, or even a spouse that maybe high needs or less high needs. But, we usually fall into that caretaker role. And so that puts more pressure on us to split our time and to split our energy. They talk a little bit about the mental load where you're thinking about the laundry and the kids and the store and all of that all at once. And men just, and it's to their benefit, right? And we could do it too, but we just don't have that ability, I don't think. And in some ways, that's a good thing. The children may not eat if we had the ability like they do to just kind of block out everything and focus, which, that is a strength and a skill that we as women can work on. We face age discrimination earlier. So on average, about 5 years younger than men. We kind of have a sweet spot of like maybe 5 years where you're not too young or too old, which is frustrating as a woman. Mm-hmm. We also face just a lack of skills. I mean, there is bias, and some of it comes down to, from a very young age, in America and in other cultures, we don't really learn the skills to promote ourselves, to negotiate for money, and that starts off bad in the career, especially the salary negotiation, right? If we don't negotiate our first salary well, it sets us on a path. And so we lack some of those skills because culturally, those aren't things that we're supposed to do. Promote yourself, negotiate, talk money, be assertive. And so we face some of those barriers just in the societal picture of what women are that then really impact our ability to succeed at work. And there's a great article by Dory Clark kind of about how we can flip that script and think about the strengths that we bring because of our community building and some of those other women strengths, and how that might help us overcome some of those challenges that we don't have some of the business skills that men learn a little bit more naturally.
Love that. Love Dory Clark. I'm going to have to find that article. Do you remember the title of it?
I'll find it. I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Put it in the chat.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you. So let's talk about like negotiation. I was in a clubhouse room earlier this week, and we were talking about negotiation. As you say, women tend not to negotiate their salaries, and that, as you also said, sets them on a course, a path that is less than ideal, and it's an uphill battle. So how can we overcome, is it a fear or just lack of practice, lack of feeling like it's acceptable to negotiate a salary?
Yes, the acceptability, we think, we're not supposed to do that. Kind of you take what you are offered. And the skill of how to do it, which men struggle with too, but they're a little bit more likely to kind of fumble in the dark than we are.
Right.
In a lot of things, which I know we're going to talk about job postings later, but that it tends to be, and a little bit of that is personality driven, but on the whole, men tend to be more willing to do something when they don't quite know how to do it. So the skills, the societal pressure of not doing that. And then if you've never had the practice or never been told that you should do that, you don't even think about how to do it. And I work a lot with people who are resume writers and coaches,
right?
And mostly women, although we do have men in our group, but they struggle with the same type of thing when they're communicating the price of their service to their clients. And you've got to practice it. You got to practice asking or practice stating that, because otherwise it comes across as a question. 750? Right? And that nobody's going to buy that.
No one's buying that.
Right.
That's funny. I've definitely been there, especially when I was early in my career or earlier in my business. And I also wasn't good at negotiating salaries, so I can totally relate to the experience of all jobs searching women. So what about resumes and cover letters? What's some of the language or branding that women tend to use that discounts their qualifications?
Yeah, so this is fascinating. And this research was brought to me by Dr. Cheryl Minnick. And she did a whole session for us on bias and resumes and went through all of the bias. And I got to tell you, it was a 50-minute presentation. At the end, I think we were all just angry because there's so many ways that bias comes across in job search and in resumes. And we all want to fight against it. And we want to say, I'm not going to play that game. Or sometimes I'll hear coaches say, my clients just need to be who they are. And some of us, we can be, right? Some of us can be bold and be whatever we are and say, if you don't want that,
take it or leave it.
Yeah. But that's not always the case. And right. I kind of have a little bit of an issue with us thinking someone who's biased is a bad person. Because the data shows that all of us, 100% of us, are biased against something. The largest bias is overweight, and like 80 or 90% of people are biased against people who are overweight, which means that 70% of people who are overweight are biased against people who are overweight, right?
Right.
And so being biased having a bias doesn't make you a bad person. Being unaware of it means that you may not be making great decisions. But I just want to be careful about vilifying organizations or even hiring managers that have bias, because it doesn't necessarily mean they'd be a bad manager, right? They definitely could learn things and do things better. But anyways, so fascinating stuff. Women tend to use more words in their resume.
Like quantity of words?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you wouldn't think that that's a problem, right? Well, then I was on a session, but Cheryl kind of said why it was. But then I was on a session just a few months ago with someone from JobScan, the resume scanning service, and they were talking about how recruiters and hiring managers say that 1,000 words is about the length that they like.
Oh, okay.
And who would have thought that there was an ideal length? But so that makes sense to me. Then I kind of put the pieces together, and okay, if women use more words, then they are more likely to be discriminated against. You're not getting to the point. You're burying the lead if you're using more words. All of those things are getting in that way, which is just interesting. And I harp on this with my resume writing students. I believe and I think, especially in a cover letter, male clients probably rarely use those words. Those are female words. I believe I can add value to your business. I think I can bring this. And right away, you're degrading your qualifications. Yeah. So watch for those. I believe, I think, and then in an interview, just and only. So I've only done this, or I've just done that for 2 years. Those words are more heavily used by females. That skill of promoting ourselves, we feel better if we use I think or I believe. It doesn't feel as pushy. And what we're doing is just making ourselves sound less qualified.
Such great points. The just really hits me, because I've been trying to make a concerted effort in my emails not to say I'm just following up on. I'm just trying to cut the just saying I'm following up on whatever. So yeah, it's very subtle language that most of us probably don't realize that we're using.
Yeah, so there's a fascinating thing, and you can Google gender decoder, and it's supposed to be used for hiring managers to decode job descriptions so that their job descriptions don't sound mostly male. However, you can plug a resume in there and it will give you the same things. These are female sounding words. These are male sounding words. If you're a career services provider and you want to think about your marketing language,
right?
Thing, you could plug in, your marketing language from your website or your LinkedIn profile, and it will tell you, are you using more female words, more male words? And it's very fascinating.
Oh, that's so fascinating. Gender decoder. I'm writing that down because I need to take a look at that. Gender decoder. And I'm sorry, who developed that?
It's some weird open source thing right now. It's got some funky web address, but if you Google it, you'll find it.
Nice. Definitely will need to check that out. And just a note to the people viewing tonight, make sure to get your questions into the chat. Anything you're wondering about that you'd like to ask Marie, please do feel free to put them in the chat or put in on YouTube or put them in the comments on LinkedIn. We will definitely get to your questions. So we know that women have been hit very hard by the conditions and the climate of the pandemic. A lot of women have felt the need or have needed to step away from work, step away from career in order to raise kids, homeschool kids. It's a lot. So now that things are looking maybe more positive and people are starting to return or women are starting to return to the workforce, what would be your advice at this point for them?
So we like to pretend that things are all cozy because of COVID and nobody's going to discriminate against you because everybody was impacted by COVID. The data on motherhood bias is real. And I don't think that the touchy-feelies of COVID are going to just wipe that out.
Right.
So I always think about what is relevant that you were doing during this time to the job that you're aiming for. If you're a teacher, then obviously, by all means, you're going to talk about that homeschooling. If you're not a teacher, can you find a volunteer experience? Or you can talk about homeschooling maybe in a way that gets to the relevant skills. And if you can take a class that could fill that gap. So there's also a little bit of fascinating research on resume gaps. And what it showed that is if people show they have a gap, they're like 4%. You get a 4% callback rate. However, if you fill the gap, you can get it up to like an 8 to 11% callback rate. This is dismal, right? We know this about online applications. It's still dismal, but it's less dismal if you fill the gap. The number one thing that increases your chances of being called back with a gap is school, education. This is lovely because you could go sign up for a Coursera class today and fill your gap with a Coursera class.
Yes, a free one.
Right, a free one.
Yeah.
And take advantage. I know most of those classes like propose a project, do that project and put it on your resume. So it may take a little bit more effort, but you could fill that gap with something else besides motherhood. And if you want to put like, caring for family members, that can also fill the gap, but I would not be specific in terms of children. And I don't even know that I would have had that much fervor about this topic until I did some research because we were going to be talking about this. And so this was data, and it's a little bit old. It's from 2007. But it showed that 84% of females without kids were selected. And this is kind of compared to males. So you had an 84% chance against your male people if you didn't have kids. Mothers, 47%. 47%.
Wow.
If there was something on your resume that let them know you were a mother.
Now,
do I think this is right? No. But when you're trying to get back to work, I don't expect it to be the time that you are taking a stand against this bias, right? If you want to take a stand against this bias, you go for it. But if you don't have that luxury, then take the things that show you're a mother off of your resume because it's going to double your chances of getting a call back. If it's funky data, but yeah.
Wow.
$11,000 less in salary.
Wow. So you're just starting, like you're taking several steps back and from a negotiation standpoint, you have to make up a lot of difference. Wow. Okay. So that really changes my, now that I know the stats, this is going to really change my approach for covering career gaps for my clients. Because I have worked with a lot of moms returning to the workforce, and we do mention that, but I didn't realize the stats were like that. Wow.
Yeah. And I used to work with gentlemen who had violated parole and were back in the judicial system. And I always told them, there's a lot of different things that you can do. So you can change how you look, which would be, change your resume, take away the motherhood stuff. Yeah. You can change where you look. So you could specifically target organizations that, are okay with motherhood, right? Nonprofits that work in that space, organizations that outwardly promote that. So that's another option. If you, like I worked with a woman once who'd been out of engineering for 12 years. And so we filled her gap with, raising the scholarship money at the school and Boy Scouts. Right. And so, she wasn't going to be able to hide that. So she would go look at organizations where there was going to be a fit because she was a mother.
I think that's a really great strategy because, there's something to be said about bringing your whole self to work as well. Do you really want to hide the fact that you're a mom? I don't know. Like, and I'm hopeful that some employers are seeing more and more value in recruiting and hiring moms. Because what's the saying? If you want something done, give it to a mom.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't consider it necessarily hiding. It's just that this is not the time. It's kind of like a first date, right? It's the first date. And in that first date, this may not be the time. That's right. most people that have a bias don't even know they have it. So they're going to have it when they're reviewing that resume, but they're not necessarily going to carry it on. So I worked in an engineering school helping recruit graduate students. And I worked specifically with the faculty to recruit the students. And we'd gotten through the interview phase because somehow this person knew that one of the students we were recruiting was a mom. She was an experienced engineer coming back for her PhD. And he said to me, Marie, I'm just worried about her ability to finish because she's got 3 kids. And I looked him in the face and I said, don't you?
Yeah.
And he was like, she got in the program and she was phenomenal, right? Because she was already used to managing a job and 3 kids.
No kidding. So, hello.
Yeah. So but he was a great manager. He just didn't even realize what he was doing.
Yeah.
And so then she brought her whole self to the classroom and it was fine. So there are those kind of maybe games that we play on a first date so that we can really get to know if this is a good fit before we bring our whole self. I also once worked with a guy that was interviewing and he said, every time we start talking about my divorce, it just kind of goes south.
Oh,
like, why are you talking about your divorce in an interview?
Yeah, what was
right? But the same thing. I want them to know everything about me. It's like, no, right? So I think that there's some of those pieces that we think about a little bit differently. Of I'm going to focus first on the skills and the opportunity, and is this a good fit both ways? Then I bring myself to the opportunity as we get to know each other, maybe.
Right. He wasn't interviewing for a divorce lawyer, I presume.
No, he was interviewing to sell windows. Yeah.
How could you spin that? I can't think of anything.
Well, I just asked him, like, how is that coming up? It was very interesting.
That's funny. Oh, boy. We've got a couple questions that have come in. One for me that I just want to cover off the top. Someone was asking about the surprising stats that I shared in the post for this video. I have those links in my most recent YouTube video about job search confidence, which you can check out. So they are linked in research studies, so you can also Google those. And Lisa's asking, what tips do you have for a job seeker over 40?
Yeah, so very similar items found about gender bias, age bias in a resume, small things that we don't think about that are easy to fix, like double spacing between periods and the parentheses in your phone number. Like the parentheses were there because you didn't used to have to dial those 3 digits, right? And so little tiny things that when you add them up just make someone look outdated. And of course you're thinking about, how far do I go back? I like to kind of walk the line there. I don't want my client to look 35 on paper and then show up as 60.
Right.
Personally, I think that feels a little funny, but not going back too far, making sure that your language is new, especially if you're talking about any kind of technology, that is new. And then when you're on video interviews, bringing the energy. So I guess the thing I talk about with people who think they're facing any kind of bias is let's dig in and let's really talk for real about what those stereotypes are. So with age, it's usually that the person doesn't have enough energy, that they're going to be a know-it-all, especially if the person interviewing you is younger, that you may not be, that you're behind on technology. So you just really want to think about what are all of those things that people are assuming. And then how can you make sure that you definitely don't play into those, but then in any way you can actively show that you're not going to do the things that they are afraid you're going to do.
Great tips. The double space after a period. That's one that, like, now that I've looked at thousands of resumes, when I see that, it like really jumps off the page to me. So it probably would for a recruiter, but the parentheses around phone number, I didn't realize that could seem kind of like an old style. I personally use it. So what would you, what would you put instead? Like just a dot, like period or hyphen?
Yeah, the period is the most modern. I think the hyphen is fine too. It's just those, and it's little, and people say, "Oh, that's so superficial." Well, yeah, but that's awesome because it's really easy to change.
Yeah,
You can't change
super
it,
easy to change.
You can change some of those things.
I am going to change this from now on. Wow, I'm learning a lot today. Christina is asking, I find that there's a fine line between being humble, female mode, and being too confident, male mode. How do you know when you're being too confident in an interview? I don't want to be mislabeled. Oh, good question.
This is the double-edged sword, right? If you're assertive, you're seen as aggressive because people aren't used to that, and you're walking this really fine line. So I actually have a whole 60-minute podcast that I did on humility, because I think people talk about humility incorrectly. We think about humble as weak. I want you to reframe humility and think about it as, I know I still have more to learn, and I'm thirsty and hungry for that. Like the Rock quote, right? Always be the hungriest in the room, the hardest worker in the room. So confidence, and there's 3 kinds of confidence. You have confidence in your ability to do something that you've already done. Usually that's where like confidence come in. You have self-confidence, and self-confidence means like I'm generally confident in myself and my ability to do things in general. Right. And then you have self-worth, which means I think I'm worthy regardless of how you judge my performance. So what happens when we come across as overly confident can actually be that our underlying self-confidence, our belief that we can do things is faltering, or perhaps our self-worth is faltering. And so we're trying to come across as confident, but we're actually kind of overcompensating for that loss, that lack of self-worth or self-confidence. So I really examine that, especially when we've been laid off or we've been out of work for a year. Your self-confidence and your self-worth may be struggling. And therefore, when you come across as confident, it's just coming off a little wonky because you're trying to be overly assertive about what you can do because you really don't feel confident about who you are and that you add value as a person.
Got it. Wow. So much to think about with confidence.
We did a presentation on confidence just a couple of months ago, and I found this just amazing article about those 3 levels of confidence. And I thought, wow, that is, I mean, it is deep, but it helps us kind of understand about why, when you're trying to sound confident about something you know how to do, why does it sound weird? And I worked with a client once, and it's kind of that entitled air that comes across when you are pushing too hard to prove that you deserve this job. It just sounds funny versus just kind of living in, this is the facts. These are the facts. This is what you've done. This is what demonstrates that you fit this job. And it's just a shift in language to make sure that you don't come across as, I deserve this, versus I've earned this. This is what I do. This is who I am.
Yeah, I have this track record to show you.
Right.
Need I say more type of thing.
Yeah, the facts. the facts, like the stories, which is why we all teach our clients to practice their stories, because if you really practiced that story about your accomplishment, then it's going to come across as that story versus you trying to sell it. So sell it with the specifics instead of selling it with overemphasis.
Overemphasis or feelings, or back to what you were talking about before, the I believe, I think language.
Yeah. And the language that I usually hear there is people talking about who I am instead of what I've done. So even on a resume or LinkedIn profile, you read somebody say, I'm a sales guru, or and it's like, really? Who says? If you read someone's profile or resume and they say, this is what I've done, that can say in the context that this is who I am without you saying this is who I am. And there's a fine line there, and it's hard to find. But the more you can tell those stories to demonstrate who you are and what you do versus saying who you are and what you do, it's just easier for everyone.
Definitely. Love it. These are great tips. And We have another question. If an interviewer asks, how would your manager describe you? This isn't a question. I think this is a statement. Areas of strength and areas of improvement. Sorry, is this a question? Sorry, your name isn't coming up because
Yes, so what I'm reading, they're saying if someone asks you, tell me about your strengths, you usually say, I am XXX.
Right.
But instead, you might have one of those, but then a story. So I don't have a story on the tip of my tongue.
Right.
So you've got that thing that I'm strategic, and this means that when I plan something, I really think about the big picture impact, and that helps drive me to the finish. I love to know, that big picture impact. So you get this story, and the story backs up what you've just said versus a long list of, these are all the things.
Got it. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for picking up on that was a question. And yes, it was a question. So fantastic. So let's see. We had a lot of stuff to cover. So back to the stats that LinkedIn had in their data from 2019 and then recently. So I guess recently, the stat that surprised me was that something like 80% of unemployed women are willing to really widen their net, their job search net, so to speak, and consider totally making a career shift into another profession. And when I read that, I was like, okay, that's flexible, but is that really ideal? Are you giving up is the wrong term. Are you feeling pressured to pivot because you're having a hard time in your job search? What do you think is happening what's behind that number?
So I think a few things.
Yeah.
One is that when life sucks, we start searching for ways to fix it. You've been homeschooling your kids and doing 4 things at once, and you're just feeling worn out. And you're like, well, maybe my career's the problem because I can't change my kids.
Yeah, right.
Well, let's change that job. And that for sure could be a good step, but I just encourage people to take a step back and really assess what is causing the pain, what is causing the problem. Because changing careers is actually going to create a new pain, at least short term.
Yeah.
And you may want to endure that short-term pain for a long-term gain, but it's not going to be a quick fix by any means, right? Changing careers, as you know, means that your job search is going to be longer. You may have to go back to school. So really just thinking about, why am I wanting to make this change? Is it because there's actually something I want to do differently? Or is it just because life sucks right now and I'm trying to find something I can change?
Yeah.
And we want that meaning in our work. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to find it somewhere else. So that's another thing I'd be careful of. I talk to people that want to go work at a nonprofit. It's like, well, that might be great for you, but it's not going to have a built-in meaning button.
Right.
It's, what does job satisfaction mean to you? Because some people really want to do a certain thing. Some people want to work in a certain type of environment with certain types of people. Some people want a certain work environment, like maybe you want to work from home and that's the most important thing. So really getting clear on your values and which value is it that you're trying to meet, and then realizing that you're going to have to give something else up, very likely, to be able to get that thing. So if you want more flexibility, can you take a pay cut? Or you take a job where you're not going to do exactly what you want to be doing, right? Because you can't have it all most of the time.
You can't have, most of the time. You can't have you can have it all, just not at the same time.
Right.
So, and the whole, the grass isn't always greener type of thing comes up. And when I read that stat, I should say, the image that came into my mind was there's 2 miners and they're mining for diamonds or something, or gold or something. And one is going away, giving up. And then one is persisting and almost there. So sometimes I wonder, are you almost there in the career that you have always been going after? Are you almost there? Is it just are you just gonna need that final push to get you over the finish line? I just don't want, my worry is women or anyone will just see that as the golden solution, which is often not, as you've said.
Yeah, and people do tend to advance by moving, but usually within the same industry.
Right.
So if you want to change roles, you want to, move up, especially thinking about how you might do that within your same company, because a lot of companies, the internal mobility has increased, not all, but some. And then also, if you stay in your same industry, you'll be able to make that move up more likely. And then you could move out into a new industry at that same role. So just thinking about it a little bit more, what's the first step, and not trying to, take the huge leap, because that's when it usually takes more time and effort and energy and can be even more risk.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm learning so much tonight, and I know you all are too. So make sure to give this video a reaction on LinkedIn or a like on YouTube. Show the love, please. And thank you, Marie, so much for all of the wisdom you've shared so far. There's a lot more that we're going to talk about and unpack. So keeping on the stats, the 2019 stats, I think it was 13% of recruiters would not click on a woman's profile if it showed up in their search results. What do you think about that? That one made me really mad when I read it.
So frustrating, because I don't know that there's too much we can do about that. I'd say one, make sure your picture is professional. It's judgy and it's not fair, but just make sure it's as professional as you can get. Watch the cleavage. I think those things just immediately, for maybe even some good reasons, right? If a man doesn't want to have someone say, well, why'd you click on her profile? Whatever. So just being as professional as we can in our picture. And again, no family, right? Be careful about that piece of it. And then our headline, and I'm sure you've talked about headlines, some values. So we need keywords to get found, but we also want something in there that shows how we're differentiated. We'd had a session that a recruiter did for us where he went through the back end of LinkedIn Recruiter and was showing us all his search results. And, it was like tax advisor, tax advisor, tax advisor. Everybody had the same exact headline because they were tax advisors. So no creativity in the group, just kidding. But that first 100 characters is what shows up in that recruiter view. So you do want some keywords and your title, but also think about, is there something you could have in there that's different? Closed this many sales just as a really small thing, or, filled. I worked with a recruiter once, and in his headline, we put, like filled 100 roles in 100 days or something like that.
Right.
Just a little tiny thing that shows some intrigue for people to click on it.
That's awesome. Yeah, totally agree. Headline is just prime LinkedIn real estate, and you got to talk about what you stand for and what you're all about. Absolutely. So we've got that. Then the other stat was like 20% of women, after they view a job posting, they choose not to apply, women apply to 20% fewer jobs than men. That, I'm not sure if that means we have discerning taste, which I would say yes, but I don't think it's that. I think it's deeper. So what would be your thoughts around that stat?
So two things. One is, you're right, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So in 2015, Alexandra Levitt, who talks about the future of work, she and the DeVry Career Advisory Board did some research on successful job search and what are the traits of successful job seekers. And one of those was that they apply to fewer positions because they're focused. They're kind of hitting the nail round, whatever. They're hitting it where they need to hit it instead of the spray and pray. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Where the bad part comes in for women is that we typically, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's something like women will only apply to a position if they meet 90% of the criteria, whereas men will apply if they have like 70 or something. So we need to not over discriminate against ourselves because that job posting doesn't fit. I say if it's around 75%, go ahead and apply, because obviously you can't get anywhere if you don't apply.
Right.
And then think about how we can use our connectability and in general, stereotypical speaking, our networking skills to get where we need to go, right? We know jobs are found via networking, not via applying online. So dig into that strength, dig into your network. Don't be afraid to ask for help. This was my husband talking to my 4-year-old son yesterday. So the first step of getting help is asking for help. I'm like, oh my goodness, I could use that lesson. I'm not great at asking for help, but
me neither.
yeah. So we need to ask our network, right? We typically have good networks. We need to ask them for help.
Definitely. Yes, women are master networkers. Yeah, so tap that network, guys. Ladies.
Well, and people always say, I don't know what to ask, or my network doesn't know anyone. When you're really clear on this is who I want to talk to, these are my target companies, then just start asking the people that already know, like, and trust you. Do they know anyone at these companies? What other companies would they think of that they might connect you to? And you'll always be surprised at who the people in your network actually do know if you take the time and ask them that question. Give them a lot of ways to help you, because they might not know anyone, but they might know another company, or they might know something else, or someone that might know someone else, so that you can start that chain of making those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you mentioned chain, because have you read Friend of a Friend by David Burkus? I think it's David Burkus.
No, I haven't. Is it the loose ties?
Loose tie. Yeah. Yeah. It's the loose tie having the most opportunity. Really. Right. Yeah. So, but I find oftentimes you have to go through the ties that you're closest with to get to the loose ties, right?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, you never know who knows someone else who could give you a hand. And there's just, I think when it comes to networking, we automatically think of people I've worked with, but it's so much more. Like, you have a built-in network with your friends and family. You have a built-in network with alumni groups or professional organizations, right? Where else would you recommend we start or look, or places that we might uncover where we can network?
Yeah. So in my job search class, we give people like this list of, religious organizations, community organizations, right, kids activities,
yes,
friends and family, yep, colleagues, former colleagues, professional associations. And if you just sit down and brainstorm, they say that on average, each individual person knows 200 people. If you use Facebook, just sit down and go through your friends list, right? Mm-hmm. And see who those people are. Obviously, LinkedIn is built in hooks to your loose ties, because it shows you, these are the people and then here's the people they know. But I'm guessing that most people have their know, like, and trust circle that they don't even have connected on LinkedIn, because they don't think about them like that, right? They're your kid's mom's friend, not your LinkedIn connection. So it might be good to think about who's in that kind of inner circle that you don't think about in a business way. Go see what their LinkedIn profile looks like, because they might not have thought about how they could help you make those connections, but LinkedIn will tell you.
Yeah.
They can help you make those connections.
Definitely. Yes. LinkedIn can tell you a lot. One of my clients, actually, she landed, I think, the job she's in now by talking to her neighbor who worked at the company already. So that was awesome.
Yeah. And you never know. So someone in the chat has asked about, gender bias and other types of bias. Mm-hmm. And this networking piece is interesting, because we tend to associate with other people like us, and they may not be able to help us access the opportunities. So you may think about your mom friend's husband, and could he help you? Because he may have more social capital than, my friend who's the mom. Mm. And so we may think about, and it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but it's just true that when we're talking about women and men have more social capital. They have more, ability to influence, usually in the workplace. So if we are just talking to our mom friends, we might be thinking, I'm just not getting anywhere. Well, what about talking to their husbands in a way that's, kosher with everyone, but so that you could access that social capital. And this often happens to people in other types of minority groups where they tend to be networking with their own community. And obviously, when I worked with the gentlemen who were in the corrections facility, same thing, right? They're networking with the people they know, and those people weren't going to help them get out of their circle and do something different. So if we can help our clients, or if you are in a situation where you feel like your network's just not doing anything, or you're disadvantaged in getting that kind of social capital that you need, you might think about, how can I get outside of my community? Could I get introductions to people that are just outside that community in whatever way that might be negatively impacting me?
Great tips. Yeah, love it. Lisa just said that she loves the lesson at 4 years old for asking for help. That's a good lesson to learn at that young of an age. And I'm sure that he'll carry it with him for forever, right?
It's going to take a lot of training, because I think, well, my husband's fairly good at asking for help, but everybody in my family, we tend to not be great at it. We're Swedish. And so, you don't impose on other people. And so I'm like, okay, we do need to start training him now so that he can be better at this than I have been.
Yes. I'm making a mental note to make sure I train my little guy too. So you recently had a Career Confidant podcast episode about navigating career transition after a layoff. So a lot of us are in situations where we've been laid off, furloughed. So what are some tips, particularly for women, in terms of addressing that and then getting back into the job search?
Yeah. So Fawn Germer, and if you Google her, you'll find her quickly. She just wrote a book kind of about getting back into it after you've been out.
Mm-hmm.
And not specifically for women, but I think some of the things she was sharing. And the first one is reality check. Like, where are you? Where do you have a gap, and how can you fill it?
Okay.
And talking about that at the very beginning, taking a class or doing something to fill that gap, because it does matter. And the more that we can be real with ourselves, the better. And like I said, it doesn't mean you have to hide the motherhood on your resume, although you may want to. You can change where you look. You can think about what those solutions might look like, but just thinking it doesn't matter is probably going to be a bad strategy. You're going to get frustrated because you'll just keep applying and not knowing why you're not doing things. And we really have to take a hard, critical look at our skill sets. What might we need to upskill? What gaps do we have? What areas might be not in our favor? And how do we want to address those? And sometimes we'll want to address them one way, and sometimes we'll want to address them another way. And each individual is going to be different, which is challenging for us as a coach, right? If I'm working with someone who feels like they're struggling because they're being discriminated against for their race, I'm not going to tell them, you should change your name on your resume. That would be very frustrating, insensitive, and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
However, really talking about, this is real and it could be happening.
Yeah.
What do we want to do about it? Do we want to change some things on your resume? Do we want to change where you look? Do we want to change how you look? Because you could really focus on connecting to diversity recruiters to try to get around that bias. But if we just pretend it's not happening, we're just going to keep, hitting that same wall.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And to one of the commenters' point about racial bias being highly problematic, Rona, do you know Rona Pierce? She's a recruiter. She's a product manager turned recruiter and turned career coach. And she is really into video cover letters. And she was on Office Hours, and we've done some Clubhouse together. And she said, if there's bias at a company, I'd really like that to become known in the form of getting rejected before I'm there in the company working for it, and the bias comes out then I have to leave the job. And I agree, and I think that works for both, like bias towards females as well, towards women. We don't want to kind of bypass that and then find out that everyone's against us because we're female.
Yeah, although again, I just be a little bit careful with that, because you may be eliminating a large percentage of your opportunities because of the percentage of how many people hold a bias.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So, and the idea that if they're biased, they're bad, it means that they're not going to treat you well. They may, and they may not. And there's other ways to fix that once you get in. Now, if the organization really has a bad culture, that obviously you wouldn't want to go into that. But thinking, I'm going to put my motherhood fair and square on my resume because I don't want someone to hire me unless they know I'm a mother. You can do that, but I don't know that someone hiring you because they don't know necessarily is any different. So a couple of years ago, I purchased a program from a male, and I didn't know very much about that male when I was going into the sale of this. It was a good program. It's our personal branding program. William Arruda founded it, and he's amazing. But when we went into the process, I didn't know him that well. And we had started talking about career thought leaders taking the Reach personal branding certification programs under our umbrella before I got pregnant. And I did not share with him that I was pregnant the whole time that we were negotiating the sale, because I didn't know, right? I don't know him. I don't know if he would be like, well, I don't want to sell my baby, right? Because that was he didn't want to sell his baby to someone that may not be able to take care of it well, right? And that would be his bias. But it's, but he's a great guy. And I don't know that he would have had that bias because I didn't give him a chance to tell me, which you could think of as negative or positive. But for me, that was not his business, right? And we were doing a business deal, and that's what we were negotiating. And then later I got to know him, and he's a huge supporter of women. And, one of his main donations is to women's organizations. And so he's a big supporter and probably would not have any problem with it. So each person has got to walk their own path. And what do you want your story to be? And you get to decide what you get judged by. I think it's just the fact that you've really got to think about what that means. And I'm a little cautious of overly vilifying bias because the data shows that we all have it.
That's a great reminder. Yeah, for sure. For sure. We don't want to assume people are bad because they have bias. It's just human, right? It's all part of us. So, this is all great stuff. If you have any, as we're getting into the last 8 minutes of office hours, if you have any questions for Marie, please do get them into the chat or into the comments on LinkedIn, and we will get to them. So language, we talked about language before, I think one area of language that I see coming up frequently in resumes or interviews or with my clients is women tending to discount accomplishments because, or discounting their contribution to an accomplishment because it was a team effort. Do you see that come up a lot?
Well, so I see this with younger people. So actually the best example that I had come of this was a male, and he was younger. He was applying for a program coordinator position at a nonprofit. I was helping, I was on their board, and he was telling all these we stories. We did this, we did that. But he was going to be the leader for the program. So I asked him specifically, like, tell me about your role there. Tell me about your contribution. And I was trying to push him, and he just kept the we. And when he left, I said, he did not show me that he could lead independently. And this was a small organization. There was like 5 staff. There was no way that we could have an employee that required a committee to do everything. So there's this fine balance between showing I'm collaborative and can work with others, and showing my contribution and my role. And if people are writing their stories and practicing them, they can find that balance and really think about how is that coming across and what is the role that I'm targeting. Because especially if you're targeting somewhat of a leadership role, you need to be able to speak to what you have done and how you've led things. And so that accomplishment was your team, but what was your part? How did you take the lead?
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, for me, I would really like to see even just a minor shift in language on resumes. Like to make it maybe more palatable, because I think it's a very hard kind of perspective to shift entirely if, like in the gentleman's case that you're mentioning, if it's so ingrained in them that they speak like that, and they present the accomplishments with we. I like to use language like key contributor to blah, 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 blah. If it's harder for them to just say, I did this, or instrumental in blah, 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 blah. But as you say, if you led it, you got to say you led it. Otherwise, you're not going to convince anybody of your leadership capabilities unless you own that you led something.
Yeah, you got to own it. And you can own your role even if you are instrumental in. So what was that action that you took? And you can lead with that action and then share as part of a team or whatever, more towards the end. One, because starting with the verb makes it active and it shows what you did. So you don't have to claim the whole thing.
Right.
Find a verb that indicates what you did. Right. And then you can mention the team. It just makes it flow and read better.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I like that tip. So as we're nearing the end of this episode, what do you have, like, exciting new things do you have going on at Career Thought Leaders or on Career Confidant? What's new and on the horizon?
So Career Thought Leaders has our symposium starting next week. We're doing a 2-week virtual, which is awesome because we've got presenters from around the globe, from Australia and in Europe. So cool. And covering resume writing, storytelling, LinkedIn profiles. And it's meant for career services providers. And then if you are looking for a career service provider, Career Thought Leaders and Resume Writing Academy both have directories of individuals that you can find. But I just think leaving this on a positive. So looking at the bias issues and all of those things kind of more holistically, there's so much talk now about building inclusive organizations. And I love that because even, my white male husband said, I was, listening to my company talk about their programs and what they're doing. And everyone feels better when the company is focused on being inclusive, and companies are seeing that. McKinsey data shows that it's more profitable, which is excellent. Then you have the shift in female boards, right? California set a law, something around having females on your boards. Data from some of the big 4 accounting firms has shown that organizations with females on their boards do better financially. So there's all of this pressure in a good way because, hey, it's a win-win for everyone when there's more diversity on the leadership and diversity in all kinds of ways. But I think there's some real positive things out there, for female vice president of the United States.
Yes.
So some things that really are helping women make some inroads. And I would just encourage people to use your strengths, not just as a woman, but as an individual too, to really think about what are those strengths that you can leverage and how can you maximize those. And oftentimes people think when you're talking strengths, you forget about the weaknesses, but the whole strengths philosophy is that you think about how you can use your strengths to make your weaknesses better or cover them up or whatever is the appropriate thing depending on that weakness. So really thinking about how can I use my strength to my advantage, and in job search, that is going to be your network and your creativity and resourcefulness. We as women have to be creative and resourceful. So figure out and maybe have some of your colleagues or friends help you figure out how to direct that towards yourself instead of everyone else for a change.
Wonderful. I love that positivity that you're leaving us with. And one last question, where can people best follow you on the internet?
Yes. So Marie Zimenoff is pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. So you're welcome to follow me there. And then also, careerthoughtleaders.com is kind of our home for all things careers. And we have a newsletter that we do every week that shares the latest data that would be helpful for job seekers as well as career service providers.
Excellent. And I have tagged Marie in this video on LinkedIn, so you can easily click and find her profile. And also I've linked or included the links to Career Thought Leaders as well as Marie's other social accounts in the description of the YouTube channel or of the YouTube video. So fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Marie, for all of your insights and advice and wisdom. I know that the audience gained a lot of value from what you shared today. Andrea says, thanks for sharing about this important topic. And it is, I think, a very important topic. So thank you so, so much for everything. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And you have a great evening, Marie.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your questions. Thank you. It was so great to be on the show.
Thank you so much. And we'll talk again soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you.